Morning.
You gonna talk about baseball?
Not really.
You got the big inning.
That's true. I don't know how to respond to all this. I just
Morning,
thought...
Geoff.
Huh?
Good morning, Geoff.
Good morning. I just thought that since we're at the beginning of a new year, I would start with a book of the Bible that's actually called The Beginning. Genesis translates to the beginning, or the beginning of all things. And it's definitely the beginning of all things that we know, probably not all things that God knows, but that's something that I'm probably going to ask God later when we arrive at heaven. One of my big questions is, so before all of this, before time itself, before you decided to turn everything and create everything out of nothing, what happened back then? That's one question I'll certainly be asking. But I want to start in Genesis 1. So if you got a Bible today, turn to Genesis 1. That's where we're going. As I was prepping this, it was a day when I was watching Jack. And Jack and I decided to go to the barber shop. I decided to go to the barber shop because Daddy was looking a bit shaggy. Jack is looking a bit shaggy too, but I don't think they can do anything about that. Anyway, but so I was in the barber, and my barber knows that I'm a believer. He knows I'm a believer because it came up the second time that I ever sat in his chair. This is a guy that's probably my age. His uncle actually cut my hair as a little boy. He was the first barber to cut my hair as a little kid. And I stuck with him all the way. He went to when he actually came down with, he had some brain cancer, and a brain tumor just took him just like that, and devastated his family. They sold the barbershop, and it inspired, I guess, his nephew to, hi buddy. It inspired his nephew to open his own barbershop. And so, long story short, I arrived in his chair one day and I said, you know what, you look familiar. And he said, why do I look familiar? And he looks, even though he's the nephew, looks spitting image of the guy that cut my hair when I was a little kid. I told him that, and he said, well, he told me the story and everything. And we got to talking. And pretty soon, as it always does, somehow God always opens up a door for me to talk about my faith. And sure enough, it came right around, and God basically shoves me and goes, this is it, and kind of just went, here you go. And he asked, well, what are you doing tomorrow? And it was Saturday, and I said, well, I'm speaking at a church. And he goes, oh, are you a pastor? And even though I said no, and I tried to explain it, no, I'm not a pastor, I'm actually a teacher. These wayward people ask me to speak at them. Anyway, and they haven't kicked me out yet, so I guess I'm doing something right. Anyway, and so I continued to tell him that, but now every time I come back to sit in his chair, something comes up, and he always says, well, you're a pastor, right? And it's been maybe a year now, and I hate to tell the guy no, so I just go, yeah, sort of, something like that. And I just kind of let it happen, but my barber has this thing. He really wants to know more about the Bible. And how do you know that someone that's not hasn't been raised in churches or anything like that, they don't really want to ask you point blank about the Bible because I actually don't know why. What he does is he actually brings up other books that have disproven the Bible, and then listens to me talk about the Bible. And so he asked, he didn't want to ask what I was speaking on Sunday, but I translated his question, which was in circles, to that. And I said, well, on Sunday I'm talking about Genesis. And he said, oh, cool, have you read, what's the book he was talking about? Anyway, it's this book it's the series that he's reading right now. It's this author that's trying to actually go back to when they were putting together the Bible, and goes to disprove several books that actually went in. And he said, Moses wasn't there supposedly on day one of creation. How does he know that actually happened? And I just kind of smiled and just, well, he probably got it from God, didn't he? Isn't that what the whole book's about? And he went, well, no, I mean, seriously, it's probably a metaphor. There's a lot of metaphorical things. And I went, yeah, sure, there are definitely a lot of metaphorical things. In fact, it talks about Jesus a lot. in there. He gives a lot of metaphor to Jesus, and we kept going back and forth and stuff. It's a great conversation, and we ended on good terms, but I found it really interesting that Genesis is so divisive, I guess, which to me it never has been. It's very, very straightforward, and that's probably the beauty of it. It actually reads to me like poetry. It's almost like Moses was sitting down to pen this, and instead of saying, these are the words that have been given to me by God, and kind of detailed how everything was created, he tells it in sort of almost a song. If you listen to this really carefully, you can almost hear a poem developing, almost because I think it's because the whole situation is just beautiful, how it all bursts forth into what it is right now. And I'll say something very controversial. It's still going on. If you think about it, a lot of North America was at one time underwater. So when the world was created, according to a lot of scientists that have studied this, we were probably underwater. So that means that when we actually came up for air, well, the Pacific Northwest never did, but places like Arizona did. When they came up for air, now all of a sudden you have this new land. And so you could almost make the argument that God's great story of creation continues to happen all around us. And we'll talk about this today. David in Psalms even talks about how if you survey the amazing creation of God, you have no excuse but to bow down and worship the creator of the expanse. Just the beauty and the marvel of creation. I think that's why Genesis is so beautiful. So in Genesis 1 is where we're starting. It was a lot to put down on a slide, so there you go. I just gave you the verse right there so you can follow along. We know that Genesis, my stand is falling. We know that Genesis is named Beginnings. In the book of Genesis, it's about many beginnings. There's the beginning of the universe. There's also the beginning of all of the relationships that God sets up with all of the individuals in the Old Testament. Thank you. Could have made several stand jokes, but I said that too. You're welcome. We know that Genesis is the first book in what's called the Pentateuch, and if you're someone that hasn't been to a Bible class, when I sat in a Bible class at George Fox, we learned that the Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible, also known as the Jewish Law. But it's basically not just the Jewish Law; it's an entire collection of rules, regulations, and the relationships God formed with the key individuals that will soon descend into the line of Jesus. So you can make the argument, too, that if you wanted to talk about Christmas, and you want to talk about the birth of Jesus, the death of Jesus, and the resurrection, it all starts here, man, which is so great. So in Genesis 1:1, it starts like this. I'll do my best job to sound just like the Bible app. If you ever want to hear something that's really relaxing, the guy in Genesis 1:1, oh boy, the app just called Bible. I can't do his voice. He has a twinge of a British accent, and you just go, wow, that's amazing. So I won't do that, sorry. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. Now, remember how I said this flows a lot like a poem? A poem will often refer to a singular verse over and over and over again, cyclically, and it does this. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And there was evening, and there was morning the second day. Whenever God creates something, he says, "And it was good." He created that, and he said, "It was good." This reads a lot like a poem. And God said, in verse 9, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said in verse 14, "Let there be lights in the vaults of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years, and let there be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth and to govern the day and the night, to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. Now, throughout my life, I always thought of Genesis 1:1, where God says, "Let there be light." Throughout my life, I always thought sun, right? Because he also goes into there was evening and there was morning, the first day. But God can make evening and morning without necessarily creating a sun. I mean, he's God, but we like to overlay science over this poetry, this love story that God is creating, something that he loves very much, and he takes day after day after day to meticulously plan it out to do it. Even though he doesn't need to, he does, because he wants to I think, clarify that this is really important what he's doing. Now, I always thought, first day, light, dark, day, night. But then, as I was reading during the Christmas season, trying to kind of prepare for talking about Jesus and the coming and things, I went to John. And I read through the whole narrative of Jesus' life in John. I read through it in Luke. I settled on Matthew to preach from on that specific occasion. But John says this, watch this, John 1, he echoes Genesis. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." That's interesting. I'll go back and kind of read that for you again. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines forth in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That looks just like Genesis to me. And I think that's beautiful. John took Genesis, and if you look at the whole telling of the story day by day of how God created the heavens and the earth, when John looks back on it, he doesn't see day one as day and night. He sees day one as God brought himself into the world, and he brought forth light first. And he said, "This is the most important thing that I will ever have, and a gift that I will give mankind at some point." And John brings it back, because we talked about last week, there have been a lot of years, about 480 years, between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New. People have been kind of waiting since Isaiah to kind of go, where's Jesus? When's he coming? Are you Jesus? And they've actually been naming their kids Jesus to kind of fulfill this prophecy. So then when Mary comes along, and the virgin birth comes along, and the Magi, we talked about the Magi, all of a sudden, John and all of the apostles want to make clear that this is it. We talked about Matthew last week, and how when Matthew starts his gospel, he also references Genesis. But he starts with a whole line of who Genesis lays out, starting at Abraham. And he goes, remember Abraham? Remember when it said that Jesus, the line of David, and then Jesus would come right from him? That's where Jesus did come from, and I can prove it to you. And look at all the rest of these screw-ups that are in there too, because God can do anything he wants to do. God can bring forth life from anything. And at the beginning, God brought forth life from nothing. He made the light of the world. Let there be light. In Psalm 19, you don't have to go there right now, but I looked up a few more verses that kind of echo Genesis too. David was obviously reading the Pentateuch, which starts with Genesis, and he says this. Psalm 19, 1 through 4, he says this: "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language, where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their works to the ends of the earth." In Romans 1:20, it says this: "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that we are without excuse." Meaning, if you survey the creation of God, and if you survey not only the creation of God in the world, but like I said, the book of Genesis doesn't stop with day 7. It continues, and all of the people that God brings forth in order to bring forth his Son, and all of the forgiveness that is found in his Son. And if you think about your life and all the creation God has brought forth in your life, you and me are without excuse for telling our story. You and I are without excuse because we have seen creation. We weren't there on day 1, but we have seen God's creation around us, and through us, and in us. And God directing the things that you and I do. God saving you from all of the problems that have brought forth in your life. God not saving you. In fact, the last month, we've seen like a regression with Jack with sleep. We all got sick. Things hit the fan. And I remember going into school on Friday, and I was standing there like I was telling you. I thought I was looking through a window. I was so tired that I had gotten 3 hours of sleep in the past 2 nights consecutively, like 3 hours and then another 3 hours. And I kept praying to God, please let the kids sleep. God, you don't understand. Please let the kids sleep, because if the kid doesn't sleep, then I won't sleep, and Carrie Ann won't sleep, and we'll butt heads, and Jack will butt heads with us, and I just look at God going, what are you doing? Why won't you let us sleep? Because I want to make you stronger, Geoff. There'll be other things that'll happen in Jack's life. This is for you. I don't want to spare you from this. And who am I to stand in front of you 2 weeks later or a month later and go, hey, I'm glad God delivered me from that. God didn't deliver me. And I'm glad that he didn't deliver me from that. If you and I think about all the stories in our life where God has brought forth life, we are without excuse for telling our own story. My family a few years ago went to Glacier National Park. And one of the things that you do in Glacier National Park, I learned, is that you go on this road, and it's called the Going to the Sun Road. And they actually suggest that you don't drive this road yourself. First of all, because they said it's really narrow, but also because they said your head will be constantly pulled away from the steering wheel, and you'll be all over the road because you'll be trying to see things. And so, because we didn't really want to take a tour guide, or we're way too stubborn, we decided to do it anyway. And I was one of the drivers. I was driving my sister-in-law's car behind Peapod's truck. And so we were going going to the road. We were going to the Sun Road. Road to the sun? I don't know. Anyway, so it's a road that goes to the sun. And we did it at the right time of day where the sun would be just peeking over the foothills there. And we started climbing an elevation. And I kid you not, we rounded one turn, and you could see the entire park in all of its splendor laid out right in front of us. Lake after lake after lake, glaciers dotting the horizon. It looked like, I can't even explain to you how beautiful it was. And I'm here on the, it's a very narrow road, probably made in the 20s. I didn't do the research on that one. But we're seeing all these way smarter people than us that are actually in the giant vans and everything, and everyone's out the window looking and things. And I couldn't help it, man. I was driving, and and Carrie Ann and her sister, bless them, they were overwhelmed with how beautiful it was. They just kept going, wow, it's so beautiful. Wow, do you see this, Geoff? And I'm going, sure. And I looked over at one point, and I must have gone way into the other lane because there was just nothing on that side of the car. It just seemed like nothing. And I immediately was like, I was struck with awe and wonder and sheer absolute terror because I realized that Kias are really thick cars. And I was going, I'm like on a line, like giant buses are coming down the other way. I have never been more awed and scared as a driver. It was just an amazing experience. We got to the very top, you just round turn after turn, And every once in a while you go like, oh look, there's a goat just right on the side of the car as I was trying not to hit goats and like run off a cliff. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And it was one of those situations where you look out and you just kind of go, I cannot. Now, as a believer, I have a different perspective on this. But even as someone that was not a believer, you cannot honestly look out into an expanse like that and just say, wow, this is a good feat of science. I mean, I don't know how you would say that. I mean, it is, but who created science itself? And who was the one that basically caused the continents to divide and caused the water to leave this area and expose such a beautiful place? I was without excuse. In the next few weeks, we'll be talking about a few things. We'll be talking about sin. We'll be talking about the fall of man, redemption, justification, the promise of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the personality and the personhood of God, the kingdom of God. We'll be talking about good and evil. We'll be talking about language and government, culture, nations, religion. As I studied Genesis this past few weeks, I couldn't honestly tell you. I know as a Christian, and especially as someone living in the United States, we love to focus on the grace and mercy of God through the lens of the New Testament. And I've been very guilty of that as well. I've preached a lot from the New Testament. But this is where it all starts. As you're looking in Genesis, Genesis is where all of these things begin. It's history, it's poetry, and I believe this is actually a love letter. Let me continue it for you here. Back in Genesis 1. I'll close with this. Just read you the rest of the days that I should have had in front of me right now. This would have been way more poetic if I did that. The pages weren't sticking together. And God said, let the land produce living creatures, verse 24, according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, the wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let us make mankind in our own image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea, and the birds of the sky, and over every living creature that moves along the ground. And God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath and life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw that all he had made was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Let us pray. God, I thank you for the greatest gift of all. God, you gave us your Son. And you gave us your Son not only in the New Testament, God, but you allude to him in the Old Testament. You started with Genesis, with talking about the light that would save everyone. Just like a father who knows just what his kids are about to do, you created a plan to save us right from the beginning, God. And you gave us this beautiful earth. We thank you